that hiding place above. There's a treasure at the end of this narrow road I'm traveling, and it gives me a purpose for life. Jesus is my treasure, the only reason that I'm living. He'll still be my reason when I die. So if you're wondering where you're at, or where it is you're going, He's left a map for you and I to use. So read the map and follow close, always walking where it's showing. You just can't risk it. Think before you choose. There's a treasure at the end of this narrow road I'm traveling, and it gives me a purpose for life. Jesus is my treasure, the only reason that I'm living. He'll still be my reason when I die. There's a treasure at the end of this narrow road I'm traveling, and it gives me a purpose for life. Jesus is my treasure, the only reason that I'm living. He'll still be my reason when I die. Yes, He'll still be my reason when I die.
Look at his face. You have never seen a boy's face so bloodied, beaten, and bruised. The ambulance arrived and took Mel to the hospital. Late the next night, he remembered that he had a very important appointment scheduled for the next day. He struggled to get out of bed, but the nurse just restrained him. The next morning, he got out of bed, but he didn't recognize his broken, beaten, and bruised face. Nevertheless, he went on to his job interview. He showed up for a movie depicting him as a disfigured young man. By the way, there was another young man that although he was not beat, he was not bruised, and he was not battered, he beat, he bruised, and he battered other people. Everyone saw him as a hot-headed young boy who used violence to get his way. His opinion was all that mattered to him, and he tried to force everyone around him to see and to think the same way that he saw and the way that he thought. This young boy had a very conceited view of himself. He knew that he was rich, educated, and he knew that he held a lot of power. But what he, Paul the Apostle, did not know was that God had a different and bigger plan for him. Paul's past did not stop God from seeing him in a different and better way. God saw Paul, beaten in his ways of sin, battered in his hate, and blind in his thoughts. God has never changed since the beginning of time, but he has transformed many people. Proverbs 4:18 states, "The way of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, which shines ever brighter until the full light of day." As Christians, God gives the strength, wisdom, and incentive to grow till the full light of dawn, as it says in Proverbs. God knew that once he transformed Paul's world from the inside out, Paul would come to write 13 books of the Bible as we know it today. He would be the first missionary martyr and would become a devoted follower of God. With the help of God, Paul would come to direct thousands of people to Christ. Paul, the transformed, later became a transformer. God was patient with Paul as he was growing. There's another man that God has patience with as he grows. The man I'm talking about is my father, Eric Nelson. How do I know that my dad has patience with me? Because God has just as much patience with him as he does with me. He's just very loving and caring. Let me tell you a story about my father's patience with me, which happened a few years ago on my 11th birthday. To celebrate, we were going to go camping for a week. So we loaded up the car and we started our trip. I had just gotten comfortable in the back seat when my dad started asking me what I brought, since I have this nasty habit of forgetting important things like clothes and shoes and my toothpaste. So my dad asked me all the normal questions. Yes, I brought everything. And so he sits up there and he thinks for a little bit. And he asked me one last question. "Josh, did you bring your flip-flops?" I was pretty sure that I brought them, so I searched through my bags looking for them, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I slowly looked up, and just from my posture and demeanor, my dad knew that I had not brought my flip-flops. So instead of making a big deal about it, he just turned the car around and headed back home. So we were 10 minutes into the drive. There was another 10 minutes to get back to the house, a few minutes to find and bring back my flip-flops, and 10 minutes to get back to the place that we were already at. So that's maybe 35 minutes of driving that my dad just let go. So because my father loved me so much, he didn't make a big deal about it. I have a feeling that many of us forget our spiritual flip-flops. We get busy in life, and we forget how important it is to take a spirit of prayerfulness with us throughout our day. We get busy with the cares of this world, and we forget how important it is to have God in our hearts with us wherever we go. God loves us so much that when tragedy strikes and we realize that we've forgotten our flip-flops at home, God just turns the car around and leads us back to our flip-flops. Oh, and by the way, Mel, that young man that was beaten, battered, and left for dead, was and is the famous actor Mel Gibson. What a transformation you would have never guessed. Paul, what a transformation you would have never guessed. Eric Nelson, I'm told. What a transformation you would have never guessed. If my children one day, if I have the ability to have children, I hope that they one day say about Josh Nelson, what a transformation you would have never guessed. Thank you.
When was the last time that you followed in someone's footsteps? Do you remember whose footsteps they were? Let me tell you a story about a man who followed in someone's footsteps. His name was Bill. Bill was driving along one day when he was pulled over by the flashing red, white, and blue lights, all too familiar to many of us. Bill thought that he could conceal the warrant that was out for his arrest by giving the police officers the name of his cousin. You see, Bill believed that his cousin was a man who had no scrapes with the law. After all, Bill had used the name before when he was in a legal bind. But as it turns out, Bill's cousin had a warrant out for his arrest. Still, Bill figured that the mistake would be discovered when his fingerprints were run at the jail. He would spend some time behind bars for his parole violation, but then he would be released. It didn't happen that way. Bill ended up spending 13 months in the Dallas County Jail without access to a lawyer and without access to a court hearing. He spent almost the entire time behind bars. Let me ask you this. What difference do you suppose it would have made if only Bill had been a little more careful about choosing the footsteps he was willing to follow? Unfortunately, Bill is not the only one who follows wrong footsteps. There's another man, Steve. Steve was driving along one day in New York City when he was pulled over for a traffic violation. Steve remembered that he had a warrant out for his arrest, so he passed himself off to the police officer as his brother Christopher. Too bad for Steve. As it turns out, Christopher also had a warrant for his arrest. Like Bill, Steve ended up spending time behind bars. These two men followed footsteps without knowing where they are going or who is leading them. May I ask you a question? Like Bill and like Steve, are we following in someone's footsteps without knowing where they are going or who is leading? Jesus has a promise in John 14, 1-3, which says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me." Or could I suggest that Jesus is saying, follow in my footsteps? There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and I will get you so that you will be with me where I am always. In this scripture, Jesus is promising to pave the trail for all of humanity. His footsteps are the ones we should want to follow. But, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who sometimes has difficulty following in his footsteps. And I've often wondered what makes it so difficult. And I think a reason for this difficulty is the idea that he expects us to walk in his footsteps alone. We don't fully realize or appreciate how much he really does love us and want to walk with us. There's this poem, many of you guys will probably recognize it, but I'd like to read it to you again. It goes like this. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints. Other times, there was only 1. This bothered me because I noticed that during the lowest points in my life, when I was suffering from sorrow, from anguish, or from defeat, I could see only 1 set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, "You promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I have noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have been only 1 set of footprints. Why, when I needed you the most, have you not been there for me?" And I love how the Lord responds. He says, "The times when you have seen only 1 set of footprints are the times when I carried you." So the Lord is always with us. He never makes us walk alone. Even when we're going through difficult times, when we're going through fiery furnaces in life, he is there with us. Have you ever walked into a fiery furnace in life? I know I have. Hear me out. I've always had a pretty good life, good parents, good friends, a great church family. But being up here and the preparation of being up here has been a fiery furnace in my life. If any of you know me, you know that the last place I ever thought I'd be is standing in the middle of the stage giving a presentation to anybody. But the Lord has been with me as I have struggled with this. I have had fear, I have had nervousness, but throughout each one of those, I have never been asked to walk alone. Pastor Brown apparently thought that it was a good idea to find the most shy person in the church and ask them to give a presentation. I don't speak up very much in Sabbath school, and you don't hear my voice over everyone else's in church singing like you do hear Mr. Raposo's. So apparently that makes a good speaker. But even during these times, I know that the Lord has never left me alone. A friend told me of Roy, a pastor in one of our Seventh-day Adventist churches in California. Roy got a phone call a while ago, a couple weeks back, and he was told that unless he has a miracle from God, he was going to die from terminal cancer. Do you think that this is probably one of Roy's fiery furnaces? Probably. Another story, Greg, a man who lived in Washington, was driving along in one of the back country roads in the country, and there were no side shoulders. And as he was driving, him and his son, the edge of his tire slipped off. Greg overcorrected, ended up flipping the car, flying through the windshield, and presumably was crushed by the car. That's what they think. His son, who was sitting next to him, was in the hospital for 20 minutes and out. Just a couple scrapes, a couple bruises, a couple scratches. Do you think that this is Greg's family's fiery furnace? But maybe your fiery furnace isn't terminal cancer or a fatal accident. Maybe your fiery furnace is heart problems or diabetes. Or maybe you've lost your job and you don't know where to go to next. Or maybe your fiery furnace is the principal in the school that you have your child in, gives you a call and asks you to come into his office because he's having problems with your kid. There are so many fiery furnaces in life. I want you all to remember that he is always there, though, for you. I hope and pray that none of you have to go through a literal fiery furnace, but I know a story of 3 men who did. In the Bible, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You all probably remember the story. King Nebuchadnezzar built an idol 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and required that everyone bow down to it. Now, let's imagine for a minute 90 feet. That up there, the very top of the ceiling, is 60 feet. He built an idol 90 feet tall. That's 1.5 of these roofs. So that's pretty big. That's a pretty big show of his power. And when he asked you to do something, I'm pretty sure most people would probably do it. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not agree with what King Nebuchadnezzar was asking them to do. So they didn't bow down to the idol. And King Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage, had a fiery furnace lit, tied up these men's hands, and walked them to the furnace. And I'm sure, as they were walking to that furnace, they didn't expect to come out of it alive. I'm sure King Nebuchadnezzar expected them to die. But Jesus had a different plan for these 3 men. Jesus saved them and used their testimony today to show us how to live and how to walk. I'm sure that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't expect that jumping into a blazing fiery furnace was going to be the safe thing to do, but they were willing to do that for the Lord. Those are the kinds of footsteps that I want to follow in my life. What about you? Aren't those the kinds of footsteps that you want to follow? There's another man who has created the kinds of footsteps I want to follow in my life. My dad, Eric Nelson, has created those footsteps. Do you know why? Because he follows Jesus' footsteps. In my dad, I see someone who is honest, who speaks with integrity. I see a man who loves completely and gives all of himself all of the time. I see a dad who is patient with his children, passionate about life, and who is someone that I can trust fully. My dad has chosen the narrow road that Jesus spoke about in Matthew 7, which says, "The gateway to life is very narrow, and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it." My dad has left his footprints on that same narrow path. I can trust them. I have trusted them, and they have led me to safety. The good news is, as I walked in these footprints, I've had troubles, temptations, problems. I'm sure my dad can vouch for that. But he has never left my side. My dad has never stopped believing in me, never stopped praying for me, and never stopped loving me. Because his footprints have led me to safety in the past, I know that I can trust them today, tomorrow, and for as long as I live. As we journey in this life, let us find footprints worth following, footprints that will lead us to safety. I have the footprints of my dad because he follows the footprints of Jesus. Whose do you have to follow? And please, friends, let us remember that no matter what we do, first and foremost, we should trust and follow in Jesus' footsteps. They will never lead us astray. To my dad, thank you for following in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. And to all dads in here, thank you for following in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, left for us to follow. Before we leave and before we have a closing prayer, I would like to remind all the dads in here that there will be goodies at each door that you leave out of. Don't forget to pick those up. We have plenty of them.
I would just like to ask my father, Eric Nelson, to please stand.
I would also like all the other dads in here that are able to please stand as well as we have closing prayer. Dear Father, thank you so much for your footprints that we can trust. And thank you for the gift of fathers, especially on this Father's Day weekend.
And Lord, I just would like to pray that as we go through this week, just to please transform us to follow your footsteps. Amen.